Geary for being on the program with us. Now, the major stock markets on both sides of the Atlantic, they're seeing a lot of red right now. Is it a signal for investors to turn further east?
I think it is. We've seen that the economies here in Asia Pacific have done very well over the last 2 to 3 years. They survived the previous financial crisis. But I think we're faced with an entirely different type of problem at the moment.
Okay, well, what kind is that if you're saying it's entirely different?
Well, I think previously we had a banking crisis where the banks had lent too much money. The banks have undergone considerable change and reform. They've strengthened their balance sheets. They've had stress tests. What we're seeing, to me now, is a fiscal crisis. It's where governments haven't balanced their books. I think it's ironic in that previously the governments had to come to the aid of the banks, and now that some of the economies are not in good condition themselves because the governments have spent more than they're bringing in, now they're sort of going cap in hand to the banks and saying, you've got to support us. And obviously the banks don't like that.
Okay, well, let's talk about the economies of India and China. They're already economically raising ahead. Now, does this set the stage for more Asian firms to rise in terms of global importance?
I think that's right. We've seen, China's looking at about 9% growth this year, India 8%, and don't forget Indonesia at about 6.5%. That's about 45% of the world's population. These are populations that have been growing. Their economic wealth has been growing. So they're now significant spenders on retail themselves. We've seen tremendous growth in the property markets, particularly in China. We've seen China's car market now become the world's largest car market. And I think major companies are looking for growth in Asia Pacific, and they're diverting their attention to these markets. I think if you look at just the announcements that were made yesterday, like by HSBC, they're cutting back in Europe, but they're adding about 5,000 people in Asia Pacific.
Okay, earlier you made the distinction between a fiscal crisis and a debt crisis right now, but it is really looking very similar to the lead up to the 2008 financial crash. Do you think the U.S. is likely to face a second round of recession, and what effect will it have on the global economy this time?
I see there's a bit of a disconnect between what the politicians are saying and what we're actually hearing in the markets. If you look at the last quarter, something like 75% of the companies that were reporting in the USA, they beat analysts' estimates. I think if you track back over about the last 6 quarters, you will find that the major US companies reporting between 66% and 75% beat analysts' estimates over 6 consecutive quarters. So they must be doing something right. I think what we've seen is the companies, they've trimmed their labour forces, they've become more efficient, and they've expanded into overseas markets.
Okay, just briefly now, focusing on the euro, those who had thought and had been saying that it was a bad idea from the outset, they're now saying, I told you so. Well, what's more useful to Asia at this point, a single European currency or going back to the old money?
I think there's no going back. I think it was the right move to have a single European currency. I think that's been good for the world to provide some balance. There was too much over-reliance on the US dollar.
But Mr. Geary, we're seeing a lot of debt in the Eurozone right now, a lot of debt problems. So why would you think or say that it's a good idea? Well, what is the argument there?
Well, I think this is where that previously you would have had probably countries that would fall out of bed. But now the European community is coming to their aid. They've put in place certain measures. I think what the markets are saying and what we've heard other governments saying is now they've made promises. We need to see countries like Greece move ahead and implement the measures. It's going to be painful, we know. But anybody that's run a household knows if you haven't got the money coming in, you can't spend it. You have to make cuts. And I think it's just a test of credibility for Italy and as well and for Spain. If government takes the steps and take some of the medicine, they'll pull through. You know, the banks in the countries, in the European countries, are strong. The banks in America, they've taken the medicine, they've cut costs, they've cut headcount, and they're strong. They've been through the stress tests. So I think it's what I call it's a fiscal crisis. You know, governments have now got to put their house in order.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Mark Geary, Joint President of the International Executive Search Federation, talking to us live from Hong Kong.